All right, good morning. Welcome to Wednesday, September 14th. Good to see you today. Today's reading will be Daniel chapters 4, 7, and 8. And what we're doing there is we're reading them chronologically. Now, yesterday I gave you somewhat of a long video. This one could be just as long. I'm just going to try to sum up some of this. All right, so let's start with Daniel chapter 4. If you've seen the movie Emperor's New Groove, you know where they got the idea now. Now, we mentioned yesterday how at the end of Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar's, talking about turning people's houses into dunghills, even those he's acknowledging God. Daniel now comes and interprets a dream and gives him a warning. Listen, God gave you this kingdom, stay humble. And then about a year later, Nebuchadnezzar decides to be proud and exclaim that he built the kingdom. God's patient. But then you see here Nebuchadnezzar for 7 years goes out and eats like a llama. It's interesting to see how God has prepared this. God built the Babylonian Empire, rose Nebuchadnezzar to prominence, to power, brought Daniel over, gave Nebuchadnezzar the dream, Daniel interpreted it. Daniel's number 2 in the kingdom. So Nebuchadnezzar now unable to rule. That means Daniel's running the kingdom, and I wonder if he hides Nebuchadnezzar. Don't know who else would be, who would be the face of the kingdom. Who are the people that are going to? And I wonder if Daniel shielded them, knowing that Nebuchadnezzar will be back. Not that I need it. I know the story sounds outlandish somewhat, but there are a couple historical records that I found. Josephus wrote of this. You see Nebuchadnezzar humbled. And I believe we're going to see him in heaven. Y'all hear the cricket in the background? We think there's one in the house. So now by the end of chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar's back in power, back mentally, but that is the last we hear of him. And we're going to be going to the next king with the next chapter. Alright, so Daniel chapter 7, let's do a little quick proof of order, shall we? So Daniel 7:1 says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So you see that there, Daniel 7:1. Daniel 8:1, in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. So that comes later. But we find in Daniel chapter 5 verse 1, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. Nothing there, but then you get into verse 30. And that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So at the end of Daniel chapter 5, we have the kingdom going from the Babylonians to the Medes and Persians. That's what happened that day. So obviously chapter 5 is after chapters 7 and 8. And then Daniel 6:1, it pleased Darius set over the kingdom. That's the Medes and the Persians. I think that the order is set this way because the narrative of the chapters fit each other, and the prophecies and dreams seem to make more sense this way. Okay, so for these four beasts, these correspond with Nebuchadnezzar's image from his dream in chapter 2. Why don't I go ahead and post that up? Stare at this for a little bit. So the lion is the Babylonian Empire. And so then the second beast here is the Medo-Persian Empire. The leopard is the Greek Empire and Alexander the Great, 200 years before it happens. Now the fourth beast is the Roman Empire. And notice how it mentions the feet as well. So remember, the Roman Empire, people use a thing about the revived Roman empires because the Roman Empire of that time, then all of a sudden there's going to be a revived Roman Empire at the end. Okay, so these horns, now some of these go out to the tribulation, but the beasts here, we're still talking about what to us is the past, but for them would be the future. So in the Roman Empire here, this would have been talking about the successor to Augustus, who would have been Tiberius, who ruled during Christ's death. But after him, in order, came these Claudius, Gaius, who was known as Caligula, Nero, Galba, Atho, Vitellius, Vespasian, and Titus. The little horn is the successor to Titus, Domitian, and he led the first systematic persecution of the church. It does fit, it does make sense, but however, the 10 kings in Revelation are not these. They are ones that will come in the future from us in the tribulation. Now, some of this in Daniel 7 taps into Revelation 5. Again, I've taught entire lessons on this chapter, so we'll not do that today. But when it talks about when judgment is given to the saints, it's talking about us during the millennium. And so then you see towards the end of the chapter again, the 10 kings now are brought up again, but these are the same kings that we find in Revelation. The 10 kings are not the same as the 3 that we just read about earlier in the chapter. We do not know who these 10 kings will be. It will be something that we will look at when it happens, and then the subduing, the numbers, all that will all fall in places in the future events. All right, so Daniel chapter 8 was written probably about 553 BC. So what we're about to see and what's reflected in this chapter, and then reading for tomorrow, we're going to go from the Babylonians, we're going to go to the Medes and Persians, and when we get there, we have Darius loses battle trying to expand, and his son, Xerxes, ends up being the one that leads the Persians against Europe and is stopped at Thermopylae. It's the story of the 300. And then the Greeks end up organizing after the battles of Thermopylae and driving back the Persians. That unification now brings about Alexander the Great and the hips of brass. Alexander conquers all the way to India, but he stops in Babylon and dies in Babylon, but doesn't name an heir. So his 4 generals split up the area, and that you see this being talked about in this chapter. Now at this point, Daniel is still in Babylon, but notice it says in verse 2 that he was in Shushan the palace. So God moved him to the where the capital of the Medes and Persians would be later. Now that's also where our next book is going to take place, Esther. So you see this talking a little bit about the Greek Empire, the 4 splits, but then at the end that's obviously talking about the beast of the last kingdom. Is talking about the Antichrist. And so remember, the Antichrist will be the first beast, and the false prophet the second. And you see here how he's going to rule. You see how times are going to change. All sorts of neat stuff is going to happen. We won't be here for it. And I don't say that because I fear it. I say that because that's what the Bible teaches. But see their fierce countenance, understanding dark sentences. Tribulation is going to be a crazy time, and people are going to follow the Antichrist. What kind of worries me right now about politics and everything, division doesn't worry me. What worries me is the thirst for unity. Jesus didn't come to bring unity, and the Antichrist will deliver unity. And I think that's what's going to, if this happens anytime in the near future, people will be so thirsty for unity that they'll follow anything that gives them that unity. But notice there in verse 27, Daniel didn't understand it, but we can look back and see what he was talking about. All right, fun reading. This is more what I like to get into instead of chapters and chapters of being told straighten your act and judgments coming, but Israel and Judah not listening. All right. Hope this was helpful to you. I hope you have a great day. We'll see you tonight at Bible study.